you were involved in very strategic design initiatives, and we're going to talk about that across different industries, but particular, as I said, life science, medical devices. And then we have Clotilde Grimaud, who's our director of product, and Clotilde and Saloni, who's one of our designers, actually are in the midst of pretty big visual brand language exercise we're doing for one of our clients. And so I thought it would be fun to have them join us as well. So we can talk about best practices and kind of not only understanding, how to start a visual brand language, but also what are the important aspects in a business sense, right? Many times there is a lot of stakeholders within organizations that maybe don't understand or are not as familiar with visual brand language. We want to kind of touch upon the business side of consistency across product lines and how it can drive growth and also brand recognition. Let me start with Victor. I have a question for you about kind of brand language. And I know that maybe you can talk a little bit about like your journey and how you came to visual brand and how you feel it's impacted your work as a designer.
Thank you. And also thanks for having me over on this fun topic. I've watched all the other series, and I think you've picked me for the right one.
I know.
This is the fun one. I feel like it's such a great topic. Yeah, I mean, for my journey, I would say all kind of starts with the art background. So going to art school and really being established as a sort of understanding all the principles of visual design and that really has to be acknowledged that you sort of not all designers come from a arts background, but there is such the reason we're all drawn to this visual discipline is that it's sort of like it's exciting and gives us pleasure to do visual work. So for me, starting at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, I had such good mentors there that kind of showed me the way of how branding impacts and how branding and design really play together. Like I can think about a branding class that I took with Dominic Jones, who's now at Amazon, and really starting to break down principles and what is the brand DNA and just like kind of the basics of what does that even mean to have what is a brand in general and what is the product's place in that brand experience. How do you apply brand, or how do you create a brand and take that into design? So a lot of exercises in mass art are also around looking at brand languages that already are out there and kind of like breaking them apart and creating a new product using their brand language. So really kind of the basics, but you really start playing that role of the designer because you understand it. In the real world, most companies already have some sort of brand and you're working off of something. And once in a while you get to kind of create something from nothing. That's also fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, going from that long time ago, I was able to kind of get into medical device pretty early in internships, and I would agree that there's sort of maybe a lack of just in medical devices, a lack of attention to the brand. I think that's changed since when I started. I think it's much has improved in the industry. But I worked with Dan O'Sullivan at Farm, one of my first internships, and learned a lot about like product design and kind of the technical aspects of product design. But really, when you think about like the brand and some of the things that I've done later in my career at Thermo Fisher, where there's like a full design language integrated with the design system for the user interface and industrial design, where there's been a lot of attention to that kind of is later. I think we all experienced that sort of becoming the standard for the industry in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years, not necessarily like I guess, I don't know, it was 20 years ago when I started. So yeah, I would say my journey has basically been this slow building on this kind of like adding more details to puzzling this idea of like you can really manage the user experience through the brand as well as the usability as well as the engineering and how the product's made. So hopefully that answers some of that question.
Yeah, no, that's a very good one. And I think you said it really well. I think, brand is kind of a dirty word in design education a lot of times, but I feel like it's a really important part. And yeah, I think we've all been very fortunate that we had the ability to kind of work in brand, and it's really, I think, in my journeys, it opened up. I worked for an agency while I was in school doing basically brand guidelines, and it really set me up really well understanding kind of the nucleus of the brand that is always encompassed within a design expression. And I would say good designers do it kind of natural, by instinct, but there is definitely a toolkit and a methodology that you can follow to get consistency across product categories or product portfolios. And the companies that do it well really benefit from it because, when you go to a hospital and you see a Siemens Healthineers system, it's Siemens Healthineers, even if it doesn't have the logo on there, right? There's certain cues, there's certain colors, there's certain interface elements that kind of make it very much familiar. And as folks are getting trained, and especially these days, I mean, post-COVID, hospital staff is turning over very, very fast. I think having that familiarity with equipment is a huge driver for not only kind of efficacy, but also trust in the brand, right? So this kind of like underbelly, I always talk about this kind of, iceberg of, the brand is basically the visual element, but there's all these other elements, human factors, kind of understanding how certain elements kind of work together that is not as kind of tangible, but it really makes a big impact in consistency. I'm going to turn it over to Clotilde because Clotilde obviously has not a design background, but has worked on many, many visual brand language initiatives, and also especially at Philips, being kind of the key stakeholder for the digital ecosystems. I'd love to hear from you how you tackled brand and what you learned and how your journey kind of evolved.
Absolutely. And for me, as a trained engineer and kind of data scientist and all these things, to me, brand language is not necessarily my first language, but I have tremendous respect for it because to me, it's so fundamental. It's the seed for the human-centered design that we all appreciate. And in a way, the best visual brand language is subliminal. You don't even notice as a non-experienced designer. It's something that you can appreciate. It's like, oh, it looks right. But it turns out that as I've learned by working with designers, there's a science to it. It's not just an art to it. There's really an analytical journey that goes on to create that experience, the whole values identification, the color journey, the color theory. So while the rest of us cannot produce that work, the non-designers among us, I think that a lot of people, I think the majority of people respect and appreciate it when it's executed well. And so to me, it is something that is transparent, but really the foundation of good design, whether it's physical design, the shape and things and color and kind of visual experience of it, or the digital design, obviously. And the best is when you can tie everything together to feel like it's a cohesive experience. As a consumer, there's nothing worse than having an experience that is, a little clunky. So to me, I don't necessarily know how to do it, but I have tremendous respect and I appreciate it as an engineer that some people can do that analytical journey.
You know how to do it. You're just not on the creative side. You can work on the structural side of it, right? This brings me back a really funny story. I think that designers are the best brand builders. Maybe I'm biased, but years ago I worked for a company and they hired an agency to do a new logo, and obviously it was all top secret, and the marketing team was working with the agency, and they were working for like 6 months on defining the new logo and typeset and everything. And then eventually, I was responsible for all the products, kind of heading the product side of the business. When they revealed the logo, we realized it was, a beautiful logo, but it was not applicable to any kind of products because it had so fine wall sections within the logo that we couldn't tool it, we couldn't print it, we couldn't apply it, and we had to instantly redesign the logo just because the agency was not familiar with what it takes to actually implement a logo in a physical product, right? And I'm sure Victor is smiling because this happens to everybody of us all the time, right? Do you have a story that is similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, all the time, but yeah, it's very true that there has to be sort of a full understanding. You have to really dive deep into what products you're designing this brand for, what environments, and it's just like any other user-centered design problem that we encounter. You have to really understand all the stakeholders and the whole systems thinking side of it. So yeah, I mean, designing the brand and the brand specifications is basically just like any other design project. But it's way more strategic. And I think there's also emotional aspects to it that, it's hard to define, but we know it's there. Like we all have a different association to how we perceive brands. I don't know where I heard this, but basically like a brand is the result of how we all think about the brand of that product or that brand. It's like we all have different connotations. And I guess that my example is actually slightly different, but it's basically when I worked at Foresight, we did a lot of packaging projects, and the lead there was Stuart Leslie, and he basically kind of defined this for me a little bit as that the logo is not really the brand or the tagline or the story. It's really the shape. Like when you think about visual brand language, industrial designer, we think about the shape of something. So if you look at, we did a project for Miller Lite, and you look at the shelf behind the bar, and it's like the same exact bottle, and then you have this one bottle that looks differently, and that shape tells a story. You don't even need to put the label on it because you'll know exactly what it is, and then you will associate that, and you can make that that story much more. You're able to use that tool, the visual aspect, and the form language is another tool in your toolkit. And that's really hard to translate to numbers or to specific like impact that it's having, but we know it's there, and that's where the emotional side. So I think that also comes down to a technical, what you can do with that bottle. If there's 2 touch points and has to move on a fast line, what can you really do with the form to tell that story, whatever it is. In our case, it was like this sort of masculine brand, and we wanted to communicate that. So how do we create some shoulders on this bottle? How do we create a solid base? How do we make it elegant so it looks like a Pilsner glass? So there's a lot of these stories that you're trying to tell, not just through the graphics, but also through the graphics. So any kind of sense that we have that you can work with, we're trying to use that as our into our advantage.
Right. I agree. I mean, it's almost this, people use this, 3 moments of truth. The first moment of truth is really this kind of like very like, almost, you don't really look at the brand. You kind of like see it coming by. And then the second moment of truth is really when you walk up to the aisle or like you're interacting with it. And the third moment of truth is really when you start interacting and using it, and these kind of like brand drivers that kind of resonate with you, right? And that's when you really come back to the brands you like. And that's why, we always tend to have brands we favor, because it's those 3 moments of truth are really kind of like all met within the context of what we feel. And there's I'm glad you bring it up emotion, because I think, Hartmut Esslinger was always talking about like design through emotion. And I think it's a really important aspect that you're not overtly emotional, but it's this kind of like positive reinforcement of the values of the brand become a huge driver in kind of the stickiness of that brand, right? Like I just like it. It's kind of what the consumer says, but it means, all the touch points of the brand are met for your user. And understanding that context is super important. Actually, Saloni, I mean, you've been recently working on a bunch of very, I would say, handheld, high haptic interactions. And I remember we did, we printed many samples. And obviously, you change the elements quite subtle to kind of create brand expressions. But there was just a moment where we all said, hey, this feels right. All of a sudden, the right balance, the right proportion, the right elements came together. Sometimes it takes kind of trial and error, right? And it really is not just like I'm going to implement my strategy and then just be done. It's really kind of this very humanistic kind of approach to kind of building a form. Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think also I feel like the brand mission is so important, like what the brand stands for. Because like when we're designing, I feel like one of the biggest things was like what we're designing, does it resonate with all the stakeholders? That's where like the mission was like critical as to like, oh, does the form sort of like tie back to the mission of the brand, what it stands for, and like how can we sort of like visually portray that? So like in the design process, I feel like just having those check-ins was super helpful to like go from that 10 feet view to that 1 foot view, to see that like throughout the process, are we staying true to the brand, and are we sort of like doing justice to what the brand stands for? So I feel like that was really helpful to just like go in and do like very rapid prototypes, rapid like visualization, just to like put it out there and see like is it still like working, what is not working. So like going through that whole process was super helpful.
Right. Yep. And yeah, I think, maybe Victor, maybe a question for you or Clotilde. How do you manage that kind of aligning of stakeholders, which is always thorny, right? Especially, when you're designing, right? You're mainly working with, I would say, engineers and people that are like, responsible for the technical aspect of a product. But when you're working on visual brand language, there's a lot more stakeholders, right? There's sales and marketing. There is like the consumer kind of relationship, omni-channel people that are really much more responsible for, I would say, the fuzzy front end of a brand. How do you kind of align all these folks around the brand mission?
Yeah. Go ahead.
For me, the fuzzy front end process is similar, like regardless of the exact project objectives. And in a way, it's all about complexity management. It's like, okay, we have a complex set of stakeholders, of people. So we have the human side of things. We have the technology side of things. Hey, there's going to be some stuff inside the product. How we don't know the size of the display yet. We don't know the size of the electronics because by definition, we're designing something new. And there's, of course, the business side of things. We don't know perhaps yet, the exact marketing angle to this project or product. And so it's all about complexity management, having a clear goal for everybody to say, yes, this is the strategic vision for this line or whatever it is, and everybody believing in the process and kind of agreeing that we all need to work together on this thorny and not yet fully designed things. And so to me, the art is in knowing what to pick up now and what to save for later. It's like, okay, the display is going to be about this big, and then that's good enough for now. So it's all about knowing what do we decide strategically to pick up and what do we leave for later.
Right. And Victor, I mean, you work for Abbott, right? Diagnostics, on a pretty sizable VBL initiative, right? And that was really, I mean, not only do you have internal and external stakeholders, you probably also have a lot of legacy elements. You want to maybe talk about how you kind of manage all these aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta really understand the whole portfolio, what's legacy, what's coming up strategically, and there's opportunity moments for when there's enough, inertia sort of to bring this topic up. So I think with everything we do in design, you do have to be very strategic when you make propositions, because it could also backfire. You could do this initiative and then it won't be cohesive enough across the entire organization, and then you're almost creating more of a problem. So I like to basically come in from, when I try to align stakeholders, of what we don't want, as the first thing we talk about is what we don't want a yard sale of our product. We don't want to have 30 apps in the app store that says whatever the company name is. We don't want inconsistency in the user experience. We don't want accessibility issues. So how do we get there? And then you very clearly and quickly realize there's sort of a lot of value to getting all of our engineering processes and basically getting not just consistent but efficiencies across handles, design elements, UI elements. It starts to become very much clear that it is a lot of value to taking an initiative like this. But it is big when you have a large portfolio with web interfaces, you have handhelds, benchtop, you have a floor standing instrument. It becomes very complicated. How do you take that across many different materials? Just think about like all the different aspects and how many changes may have to happen to certain existing parts. So you do it very strategically. You have an approach for your legacy, and you could potentially make that update on a software update, or and then you can make it update in a future release for improvements that it may happen because of quality issues. Then you can have new product releases that take on the next step of that. And so there's many different ways to do it, but it's very, very strategic in the way you should think about it. I think there's other elements to the business side of it. So when you're trying to get the team on board and the management team on board, understanding that the brand language could also, or the visual language could also indicate to users or to the customers the quality of the product. Sort of like you can go with best kind of approach. So using different materials and finishes to communicate higher quality. And so, yeah, I think definitely, at Abbott, it was kind of a good time for that, to kind of have the conversation, and it was exciting that the team bought into it. But I think with everything, there's sort of there's risk to like push for something that maybe is not the right time for. So you have to really understand where this project is at, or where this company is at, and if that's the right approach for them at that time.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. We do many visual brand languages for many clients, and the first question I always get is like, oh, are we gonna have to retool everything? And of course not, right? Because you're not gonna scrap everything and start over. But there's, as you said, there's subtle ways of implementing kind of tiered approaches where the UI could change, or even the color could change, even that some of the body parts might not be as conformative with the rest of the design language. But as you're then getting ready for a refresh on that product, then you can bring it into the fold of the greater and wider consistency of the brand elements. It's really, I think the best time to start a VBL is now, independent of where you are in your product cycle, because it takes usually quite a bit of work around like socialization, research, and really building kind of the brand elements before you even get ready to kind of tool the first product, right? So having like a 6-month runway or a 1-year runway to kind of get ahead of a first product release is probably a good way to think of kind of taking that initiative. But by no means do you have to bring it into every single product all the time at the genesis of the VBL. It becomes kind of a living document in a sense, right?
Yeah, and it has to be a living document, right? Trends change, but also everything is constantly evolving. So maintaining that document. So even if you have this amazing brand language, you constantly have to think through how do we improve it, and seeing how even Apple with a new iPhone is changing the body and the surface textures and of the phone. It's like this evolution. They're always evolving, and then maintaining that in a very accessible way for the designers on the team is very important. What I've always struggled, for example, when we're at Thermo, is like such a large organization, and maintaining consistency across all these different materials and vendors that are used, and in-house manufacturing, outsourcing. It becomes like a lot to manage, and I think there's maybe an underappreciation for how much of the team needs to be dedicated to managing all this and communicating that to all the different stakeholders. So that's one thing that it definitely has to be higher priority is like executing the brand language. I think this is what you see all the time is like this great vision, but then the quality, the parting lines, all these things are not executed right, and that's where the team has to really focus on. If you're going to put something out there, you really have to know how to execute it. So the more actually, I think the brand language specifications or the toolkit that you create that's very detailed and tested already, prototyped, and not just kind of just a visual, beautiful book, but actually some engineering time has gone into actually understanding how it implements. That pays off. That pays off a lot because then your product quality is up there as well.
I agree. I think this is that's where all VBLs fall apart, right? You have some agency doing a beautiful book that then actually they say, well, this is our new VBL, and then nobody can execute it because the paint code is impossible to match, or as you said, different vendors don't really understand how they can achieve those gaps or those tolerances that are specified. Yeah, I mean, it's also a little bit also, I feel like, obviously you are on the corporate side, we are on the agency side. The best collaborations are when you have, designers internally that are really kind of becoming kind of the gate for VBLs, and then they're working with an external partner, because a lot of times you're under resourced to really you're on the day to day, right? So you don't have the time to think about the future or the strategic part as much. But if you find the right kind of tribe to kind of collaborate, a lot of times we work with internal teams, and then really they are the ones that are getting the tools to then execute that visual brand language the right way, right? With obviously the support of the agency, but it's hard to do VBL if you don't have any internal design stakeholders, right? Or at least people that are very conscious of design, because they say, "Hey, it is the same color. What are you talking about?"
Close enough. No. I 100% agree, and I kind of started in consulting and moved to mid-size and then larger corporations. So I see the both sides of it, and it really is a challenge to be on the outside because you can have this great vision, but yes, you lose control. Like as it transfers, you may lose control. The contract ends, and then you don't know where it's going. Or the opposite side of it, yes, you're in the day-to-day, you're maintaining, you have all these deadlines, product launches, and you're really, you could lose track of this long-term strategic vision that every company needs because, it's just things move so fast now, and there's so many great competitors and products out there that you have to compete with. So, yeah, I agree. There's this sort of this balance, and yeah, I think getting some outside perspective is always helpful to have kind of fresh ideas as well.
And it's also it's a lot of work, right? I mean, a visual brand language alone is a big project, so it's hard to maintain kind of, I would say, the pipeline of products that are coming out and do it all unless you have a fairly sizable team. I mean, for us, when we do visual brand language, even at the agency side, we have 3-4 people involved, right? I mean, that's takes a lot of effort to kind of like really, get that going. And a lot of times, we start with research and strategy kind of on the front end, talking to customers. And I'm sure, Victor, I mean, I talked to you before, you do a lot of that as well internally. So you're getting spread very thinly, right, between all the research strategy and then really implementation sides. It's a lot of work. But I think for folks that want to learn about how to implement visual brand language, I think really the key is understanding the clear principles of it. These simplification with the power of design. Understanding human factors in a way that they're really related to, I would say, project or product goals, and then really creating these experiences that are intuitive, right? And I feel like, especially in medtech or laboratory science or healthcare, workflows are very complex, right? So in a sense, the simplicity sometimes becomes a kind of a visual brand language signature, right? But it comes with a lot of, I would say, technical enablement. And maybe Clotilde, we can talk about that with you and your technical background, I feel like the best visual brand language is the one that feels magic, but magic sometimes takes a lot of code writing, a lot of kind of behind the scenes technical explorations to kind of pull it off. I think I'm thinking of like maybe a work at Philips, which was, a simple light, but obviously there was a lot to it. And maybe you can talk about kind of like how do you take a visually simple principle and then infuse the technical side of it in a way that it becomes magic.
Absolutely. And if I may add, in a way, what it shows to consumers, a well-represented visual brand language, is that there's a certain maturity to the organization because they can afford to pay such close attention to the design and to the implementation. So to me, a well-executed visual brand language is the sign of a very kind of respected and quality-focused organization, which I think consumers can, smell, whether they can identify it as such or not. You can see it. And as engineers, as an engineer, I can speak for the others, but I find that visual brand languages are wonderful because they provide guardrails. They say, hey, you may not know, but you need this much white space around the logo. And so, and this is obviously the easiest example, but same in product design, it provides a certain kind of foundation for quality because you know that somebody's thought about all these things before. And so if you know the chamfer have to be that way, you put your chamfers that way, and you have, of course, the designers finish the product in a way that does everything the way it should be. But to me, yeah, the implementation of a brand language is freeing because it provides clarity on things that are so important that somebody has judged that it was important to put them in the guidelines. Of course, there's no magic bullet. You always have to do your design process based on the specific product. In my case, when I worked on the wake up light, obviously it's all about the context of use. And so it's all about designing a good product and then applying a well-crafted brand experience on top. I don't know. To me, it's a magical combination of brand thinking and product thinking in a way that makes the company kind of future forward and kind of thinking about the long term.
Right. It's kind of the business card of a well-run organization, right? If you can say, hey, this is our visual brand language and we're very consistent, that tells you, okay, you're organized, you have the right principles, you have the right longevity, you have a roadmap of products in place. I think where this gets a little bit of a curveball, which we get a lot, is merger and acquisition, right? One company buys another company. Out of a sudden, you have two very different visual executions out there. And then we as designers sometimes, which we are quite frequently, are tasked to kind of bring that all in a fold, right? And that's really where it gets tricky. Maybe, Saloni, you can talk a little bit about like bringing form elements together and kind of what is the best practice there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of test and trial, of course, but also like I feel like with the brand language, like visual brand language, like it's also like the balance of how broad do we want it to be, like as like the guidelines, like it's broad enough that you can play around with different products, but also like small enough that you have like a repetitive sort of like element which is recognizable. But I feel like one thing that we did which helped us a lot was making like 4 products which were like pretty different, but then trying to see like how can we sort of like replicate the brand language across. So I feel like giving yourself that exercise of like, okay, we're thinking of like the brand language in terms of like 4 different products, that helps a lot to bring it in real life, and thinking that like, okay, it's not just like theoretical, it's actually practical, and like we are putting ourselves in the shoes of the person designing and bringing the guidelines around that instead of like just making it very textual, I would say.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I feel like the easiest in our experience, right? I feel like the visual brand languages that were the most meaningful, or where really we get a lot of traction, was when we had already kind of like product goals around it, right? It was not just a theoretical experience. It was really, hey, we're going to do these 4 products in the next 5 years. Let's start with that, right? We know there's 20 others, but at least these 4 are like the core range. It makes a lot of sense. I think maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of Sora, because I feel like it was also kind of a visual brand language exercise that was really one product, but it was much more about like usability and like user interactions, because it's a little bit different, right? We kind of started from more on the brand side and then pushed it into the product side. I think visual brand languages can start on both ends, right? They can start on like I would say the 2D side and then kind of migrate into 3D, or they can start on the 3D side and then migrate into 2D, right? It's really more the strategic goals are the same, and I think the toolkit is the same, but the approach might be a little bit different, right?
Yeah. And I think, as Victor said, I feel that it's a living document. So you're always like updating it based on like how you're like growing as a brand, growing as a startup. That is always helpful.
Right. But I think especially as a startup, having a visual brand language tells your investors, the market, a lot of like, you're consistent, you mature, you probably are around for the long run, right? And sorry, Victor, I cut you off. You wanted to say something?
No, I agree. I think there's an aspect of like the user needs, like considering that as an input or the initiation for the brand language could be a very interesting exercise, because if you can really drive the brand story, understanding your user needs, and combine them together where it's not just a visual exercise, but also it actually serves some purpose to functionally provide. And for example, like we called it touchpoint blue at Thermo Fisher, where every handle had a touchpoint blue, and it creates this consistency across the product that any user would know that where they see blue, they can come in and interact there. There's very simple things like that you can start playing with, where it's driven by user needs. Again, want to make a product that's very simple and easy to use across an entire lab of instruments, and the cues that you use, or the primary, secondary elements that are using in the visual brand language could be actually driven by the user needs, and not just by the brand story or whatever the other communication aspects that you need.
I love that comment, because to me also, indeed, the visual brand language has visual in the name, but the experience is so important. Because that's another thing that we've been doing recently on a lab instrument line, is that in a way, if we have a cohesive user journey, then you also help yourself, your own brand, because that means that the next time you buy the same, a similar product, you have the same experience. And so that blue handle, or whatever it is in terms of paradigm, I think it is in the best interest of the brand for future purchases to know that it's going to be the same experience. The user is confident that the learning curve will be shorter, and it's all kind of a very strong flywheel of innovation.
Yeah. I mean, as I've heard it, at Abbott, we called it experience brand language, EBL. It's experience design language. I mean, it's all compacting into this idea that user-centered design is really, it's digital, it's hardware, it's all getting merged over time, and we're all noticing how you have to kind of get very well-rounded understanding the whole full user experience to be able to design a good product and be competitive out there. So, yeah, I think it's like I don't know how we, what the evolution or what it's going to turn into over time from where we are today. But from everything I'm noticing, it's much more like holistic now. It's not just this what it used to be, visual design or visual brand language, industrial design.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really a convergence between. I mean, it's been happening for the last 10 years, I would say, convergence between digital and physical, and I'm pretty proud of people like you, Victor, or other folks that have kind of worked across disciplines, right? Where I feel like it's much harder if you're coming from one side to go into the other one if you don't have, I would say, a core principle understanding of design that can guide you, right? And a lot of times it makes it hard to kind of create cohesive experiences. And, I mean, service design, experience design, visual brand language, user-centered design, they're all basically the same thing in just a slightly different context, or like a larger and larger context, right? And I think that, as designers, we can always strive for, I would say, lower cognitive load, kind of simplification, and using the power of design to, create a better experience. And that automatically goes a long way towards kind of a visual common language or a visual element that can guide you. But especially that digital physical crossover, especially with the emergence of touch interfaces, it's getting challenging from a human factors perspective to create really good experiences, right? But at the same time, it gives you a lot of possibilities, right? So how do you narrate between kind of the screen experience and the physical experience can get pretty tricky and challenging.
It's more complex. Like the more integration that you're requiring now between the hardware and the interface, it ups the complexity level by that much. Hence why design systems for the UI are so helpful, because it helps you manage that complexity and build on it.
Right.
And so in hardware, we try to do the same thing, right? We try to create a design system for the hardware where, what kind of materials and what kind of colors and all these things should be specified ahead of time, so you're not inventing every product every time from scratch. So yeah, I mean, I think rooting everything in the customer experience or the occasion that the product lives in. So, when I was at Foresight, we did sippy cups and going ethnographic research, where you're going into people's homes, opening their cabinets, seeing what's inside, and
everything falls apart.
Yeah, sippy cups are spilling out. Yeah, and you're like, why aren't you using this one? Why did you try 5 other ones? And understanding the user needs is always going to be the advantage that designers bring to the table, and then really kind of diving deep into the real problems you're trying to solve. There's a great book, Focus on the Problem, Not the Solution, or Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution, the founder ways. As there's a lot of good thinking around this really adding value as designers, not just making something pretty, and then really understanding where the value lies, then communicating that into the brand language somehow, or into the product design. That's really what we're here for, and that's what's exciting. So yeah, nowadays with Siemens, when I go to customer visits, that's where I get excited, seeing the customers, how they use or end users, how they use the instruments, and asking questions and really finding out what motivates them. Why are they excited about this versus that? That's where it really kind of gives me the drive to keep doing it. But then, like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm at heart like a designer. I started art school, so really that bridging these two, where you have the visual and the product, and we do fall in love with our solutions. There's no way around it. But also solving real problems, and not forgetting about the actual people that use this.
I think that's the biggest jump, right? When you come out of art school, is that you're not designing for yourself, you're designing for others, and understanding those needs is critical in you making a better product. And the visual aesthetic of the actual object is a very small part of that really joyful or meaningful experience overall. If anybody has questions, drop them in the chat. We're going to keep chatting. We have about 14 minutes left on this webinar. But I think, what really drives, I think, a lot of us being in this profession is really, I would say, a passion for helping people, I would say, interact with technology in a new way, or, being able to kind of master technology. I think, I would call it the UX revolution really has sparked, I would say, a new way of thinking with well-crafted experiences that, you don't need a manual, you don't need, to study and learn an object. It's not an expert system. It can be used by anybody, which actually then, if you turn it around, even expert users appreciate that, right? So, lot of systems we work on, and I'm sure Victor, you too, are used by doctors or scientists or researchers in a high stress environment. They really like to have a simple unit because it gives them the confidence that they can interact with it without error. And so the power of design is really not only the aesthetic aspect of it, but also kind of the humanistic aspect of it. Yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to jump in here or if any questions are.
Yeah, no, I'll just add that like, I always hear this, just like, you're right. It could be doctors, or it could be nurses, or it could be really anyone who's dealing with multiple complex technologies in their workflows every day. And that's just the realities. Different brands, different UI, and maybe one of them is taking this approach, and the other one is taking a different approach. And the users have to really learn a lot. Sometimes they're trained potentially. Sometimes they're, working on complex instruments, so they are trained, but they have to learn these things and then go on vacation and come back and remember they're on for long shifts. And so they have to have that cognitive load throughout a long, multi-day shift. So having it, I met Don Norman one time, and he explained what intuitive means. It's like, basically it's learnable. It's, like you said, you don't need a manual, but it's something that as you're going through it, you can learn how to use it. Very difficult to do. But it takes quite a bit of testing and really understanding like the pitfalls and the trade-offs that you have to make, and really what is the most important hierarchy. Thermo Fisher on centrifuges, the number of the revolutions per minute is the biggest number on the screen, and everything else kind of like is smaller. There's all these like hierarchy decisions you have to make based on the actual user's workflow, and it takes time to get to these insights. You can't just make something pretty and say, oh, okay, it looks cutting edge. You really have to dive deep, spend a lot of time asking the right questions, defining the problem, creating multiple iterations, multiple prototypes, and refine. So yeah, that's the fun stuff.
I mean, the first formative studies are always the fun ones, right? You come with a prototype and you realize, oh,
yes,
this is not working.
You fail fast, hopefully. You didn't wait too long for that moment.
I would say that the secret to good design is fail fast.
Yes, that's it.
Don't be in your ivory tower too long. You have to get out in the world and try your creations and interact with them, or have people interact with them.
If I may, on a slightly kind of complementary topic to VBL, I think that designers are well equipped for the future of design and products, which are less controlled but more nebulous, like algorithms, etc., in a way, because of that system thinking that is very early on, that is really kind of an overarching understanding of what your product is for. I think there's a strong need for content and for kind of guardrails on LLMs and other kind of even design. Language systems need design to think about who am I, what am I trying to do with this language model, and how do we help this nebulous, uncontrollable matter that is AI to do what it's supposed to do.
Right.
Yeah. No, when I look at sort of some decisions that are made in the OpenAI, for instance, showing you how it's thinking, and just ideas like that, you got to realize as someone who's made these decisions, these trade-offs, like this is more intuitive. Or how do you manage? It's such a complicated. It's a incredibly complicated piece of software, but then it's just a black and white input field. So you create it as like very simplistic, intuitive, by the fact that like you're not overloading with all the things you could load it with. So there's a lot to learn, and I think the other things as designers we have is just the ability to pay attention, and it's like it's good and bad. Like I have it where I see something shiny and I'm just like, oh, okay, drawn into that. But then you're you can dive deep and understand why did they do it that way, and like really take something apart. And having that interest as designers is, I think, sometimes what sets us apart. We don't take things for granted. Like really like want to know why, understand it, and so that's something that I'm always curious about how they're, how do you design like the LLMs or the new Viscom and all the new interfaces that are coming up, because maybe that's where things are heading.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because we have a very good relationship with Viscom, and whenever we have a meeting and we show them how we're using it, they're like, oh, "We never thought anybody would use it this way." I think designers are also good in hacking systems, right? So
yeah, yeah. I mean, I love watching Hector on the LinkedIn, all of his videos about how he creates all these new ways to do industrial design, and his process. It's so inspiring. I'm always like, oh man, I wish I had an hour today to like do some to play around again. But yeah, so yeah, we need that kind of like space to explore and be creative to really, if we're just not going to accept the status quo, we need to test out new approaches.
yeah, you have to. Maybe Saloni, you want to talk about this because I think you're one of the resident AI experts.
Yeah, so at Loft, we've been exploring a lot of like different tools just so that I think it started with like the scare that was there that like, oh, AI is gonna replace designers, but of course that's not the case. But like that sort of like pushed us to be like, oh, like what is it out there? Like how are these tools? Like how do you work with these tools? But also like how can you like make your design process more stronger, more efficient? And since these tools keep changing, it's always interesting that you go back and the platform looks completely different. But I feel like it's always like how you said, Victor, the curiosity mindset is super helpful because you're always then in that space of like trying to be a bit better designer, trying because like as designers we always work with a lot of tools, so these are just like additional tools that you can bring in, and you sort of go out and explore like in because every designer's process also I feel looks different, so like every person using these tools can also be very different. But yeah, like we have been exploring a lot like in the visualization, but like in the visualization I feel like we've figured out like from low fidelity to high fidelity, like where do we use what tool and what method, because the same tool can be used throughout the process in different ways, which is I think where a lot of exploration is helpful to be like, what does my process look like and how can I replicate it? Because a lot of times it's not reliable. Like these tools are not reliable because like the same prompt might not give you the same output. So like, how do you work with that as a designer? Because we deal with a lot of ambiguity, but like in this tool having that kind of ambiguity, like how do you work with it? And we have like at Loft, we have like some processes that we have like sort of streamlined that like, okay, we're gonna put in this image and this sort of like prompt, and we're gonna get this kind of output. So I feel like that has been helpful. But yeah, a lot of explorations at all times.
Oh, sounds fun.
Well, join us next month. We're putting up our toolkit for some exciting new tools or new workflows. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and you guys are doing something in Northeastern as well, right?
We just did, yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're doing the 9th of October.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah. No, we're doing it. Yeah, yeah. Sorry. We did one at Virginia Tech. No, what was the Friday one? Virginia
Yeah,
Tech.
Virginia Tech.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. We did one at Virginia Tech on Friday, and we're doing one at Northeastern. Yeah, later in
Very
the
cool. Unfortunately, I can't make it. I told my dad to attend. He's actually teaching at Northeastern now, AI. So I told him to
Oh,
attend
yeah,
for me.
for sure. Have him reach out to us. That sounds good. Yeah, we have 4 minutes. If anybody has a question, please drop it in the chat. Otherwise, we're just gonna keep chatting here. I want to, have a last question, and it's really more around, I would say, the longevity of visual brand language. I feel like I'm glad you brought this up, Victor, because it is a living document. That's the first thing in the first briefing with our clients. We always say, you know, this is a vector, right? You create a document that creates a trajectory for you to move into, but over time, really, technology is changing. I mean, you go from a touch panel to a physical, interface, or the other way around, or certain things are, from a technology perspective, are evolving. How do you, as a designer, kind of When do you know that you have to adopt or change the VBL in a way that is more systemic? And maybe Victor, you start with that.
Yeah, that's a great one because it's so tough. I mean, how do you do? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's the first thing that came to mind is actually the fact that unfortunately in hardware we get these you have to just let it go and designing something iconic as in it doesn't age it doesn't age badly, it ages well. It's just so hard to do. And it takes such good ability to trade off between what's not needed, what's needed, and understanding proportions and how to not I personally, how to not to overload something to create a good, to have a nice gesture. It takes a lot of design experience. I mean, I look at iconic forms like this, and I'm sure there was not much of a design intent at the time other than just the function of it, but it still holds, and we all know what it is. So to your question, I think it happens naturally that you have product releases and things like that you have to do, and then you're using these as an opportunity. Or when things just, we start getting feedback, when you're getting feedback that, things are outdated and or competitors are coming in and, and looking fresher than you. So that's what I can think of right now, but I don't know, maybe someone else has an idea.
To me, it takes great design advocacy. And to me, it's like, as long as somebody within the organization has an eye for this, it's like, oh, the trend is moving that way. It's unavoidable now. We kind of have to. And so if somebody has the kind of design leadership ability and sensitivity to what's happening in the world, I think it's something that happens through the official processes of the organizations, whatever they are.
I agree. I think strong design organizations are probably easier to adapt to changes, right? Because they say, hey, by the way, I just came from this research. This doesn't seem to work any longer. We have to do something about it. Versus if there is, I mean, this is also centralized design functions might be a little bit more able to kind of influence versus if they're decentralized, people are just so into the day-to-day of their product line that they sometimes don't even, see the other parts of the organization. And that's when you see like things differ and products, some companies, the product lines don't look nothing like each other, right? It's very inconsistent. And it has to do with the fact that people are just in their silo and are not really like looking up and kind of like assessing kind of the needs. Yes, this is the end. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Saloni. Thank you, Clotilde. We'll have a transcript of this online in a couple of days. And yeah, great conversation. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.